Much of the technological advances in this world is thanks to the way in which humans are capable and able to process information, more specifically process and calculate numbers and quantities internally and mentally in our minds. While we've already identified the brain regions during these numerical tasks, as well as the neural codes that represent each quantity during these specific computational tasks, it is still unknown to us how these numbers are combined and or transformed during our internal numerical computations. We also still don't know how specific quantities are generated in our brain when we internally and mentally compute numbers. For this particular study, these scientists used neuroimaging, functional imaging, to map what happens in the brain when we internally compute numbers and which regions of the brain are active. These researchers characterized the representations of the neural codes underlying the numerical information in the human cortex. This demonstrates that the brain signals are able to distinguish between numerical quantities, which means that for different numbers of items, the brain signals show numerical representations, which means that explicit numerical representations are transformed from our visual information, meaning to say that most likely these are part of the sensory extraction from the numerical information presented in the visual images. However, when we see numbers, to our brain, these are not only a perceptual image, they actually are seen as entities or quantities that are being extracted from the outside as well as transferred inside and then computed upon within our brain. Which makes this study even more interesting because even with the subjects who are not mathematically educated, this internal computations of numbers was still happening, meaning to say that even in our past generations, that is one way that humans were able to distinguish themselves a lot from the animals, because somehow we internalize the outside visual information, but our brain is able to detect that these are numbers and quantities and not just visual images. Hence, it's able to compute quantity and numbers internally inside our head. And one of the major findings of this study was that they were able to map these sort of internal computation and notice that both within the prefrontal cortex as well as the parietal lobe, there was a lot of activities. Again, we already know that our prefrontal lobes or prefrontal cortex is much more advanced than of the animals. And we also know that we use our prefrontal cortex a lot for working memory, as well as decision making and a lot of logical characteristics of us for us as humans. These internally generated computations that we tend to calculate within our head has also a lot to do with our working memory, because during the maintenance mode of the working memory, that's when we sort of keep a lot of these images and information, in this case numbers, or the results of the computations that we've done in our head. To sum up, this study showed that the representation of the internally generated numbers during these internal mental computations happened in higher level regions of the brain, such as the prefrontal cortex, among other regions mentioned in this study, too many to mention for the purpose of this video, and the sensory processing hierarchies, including the prefrontal cortex, parietal lobe, and some other regions within the human brain.